I'm living in a grace where everything is more than I imagined, where what is undeserved is freely given. And all my regrets and my failures and all of my wrongs have been left at the cross. Now all that remains is the Father's love. Oh Lord, you take me as I am. Over and over you call me yours again. Oh, you see it all, still you want me. How you love me, how you love me. Your kindness and mercy remind me how you love me, how you love me as I am. So let us be together, seated at your table in communion. Oh, everyone is equal in your presence. Oh, 'cause where I am from or where I've been, the way that I've lived or the color of skin, no, nothing can change how the Father loves me. Lord, you take me as I am. Over and over you call me yours again. Oh, you see it all,
Hey, thank you, Heather and the band, for that song. And I want to take this opportunity to welcome those of you here for SMCC Online across our locations. I don't know if you've thought about this before, but there are hundreds of people watching SMCC Online across Utah every weekend on YouTube and on Facebook. It's really been cool to see it. And I want to let you know something. If you would like more people to find out of these hopeful and helpful messages that we're putting out through SMCC Online, one of the easiest things you can do, and it doesn't cost you anything, is to go ahead and do these three simple things on this today. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and do this. Subscribe to this channel, give it a like, and then comment something in the comments below. That's a really easy and free way for you to help us reach more people, to help us show up in people's search results when they're looking to watch SMCC Online. So those three simple things, subscribe, like, and comment, is a free way for you to help us reach more people. Now, today, before we get into today's message, as we're going through the Gospel according to Peter, I've got a question that I want you to think about. I want you to ponder through it. In your faith journey, are you on a mountaintop experience right now or in a valley low? You see, I think in really anybody's faith journey, including my own, there are times where I have a mountaintop experience and I feel like I'm on top of the world, and I just feel like, man, I'm so grateful, I'm so thankful, I'm so excited, I'm so passionate about this, and I know that God's with me right now. And then there's times when I get into a valley low and I just sometimes feel like, man, it feels like God is distant. It feels like maybe Jesus doesn't care about me. And so I want you to ponder that question, because I think it's a really good question as we go into today's message. Are you having a mountaintop experience right now? Are you having a valley low, or maybe somewhere in the middle? This is the Gospel according to Peter. Let's go ahead and jump in with Pastor Eric.
Hey, life is full of highs and lows. It is full of mountains and valleys. And for some of us right now, perhaps we are in a mountaintop moment, but for others of us, it is certainly a valley. I'm Eric. I'm an executive pastor here at SMCC. Special welcome to everybody at the South Jordan location today. And my guess is that far more people are in the valley than are on the mountain. Now, the mountaintop experiences, I think we probably know what these are like, but these are the moments, the seasons in life where we're encouraged, we're excited, we feel like we are effective, we're learning and we're growing, we're seeing things with clarity. It feels like a mountaintop experience. But the valley, it's just the opposite of this, isn't it? It's when we feel frustrated, where we feel stuck, where things are just not going our way. We're discouraged and we are feeling defeated. The valley moments of life, these are the moments where circumstances are not going the way we want them to go, and we feel helpless to do anything about it. So let me ask you a question. Are you closer? Are you closer to a valley experience right now? Are you closer to the valley, or are you closer to the mountaintop as we speak? Now, over the years, I've been able to be a part of some incredible SMCC summer camps. These are great moments in the life of our church for our students. In fact, our students just got back from a fantastic winter camp. Shout out to our student ministry team. Now, during these summer camp experiences, there was always a morning in which the students would hike up to a peak right outside of camp for a message and for breakfast. And I loved going on these hikes. I loved being up there on the mountaintop with these students, because there from the mountaintop, something special can happen. I mean, you can see for miles and you can see with clarity. On the mountaintop, you're sort of taken out of the day-to-day operations of life. You're sort of removed from the distractions. And it's a moment where you feel a bit transcendent. It's like you're connecting with something bigger and better and beyond you. I love these types of mountaintop experiences, and this is what a mountaintop experience is like. Now, when it comes to these experiences, I think we've all had them. I think this is why people love to stop on the side of the road at a vista and look at the view and take a picture from a great height, because we love the moment, the experience, the feeling that comes with being elevated and being on top of the mountain. We love moments like that. Now, to be honest, for me, coming out of 2020, it feels like walking out of the valley. And maybe you feel this way as well. 2020 was rough, but I'm so excited about the things that I am seeing on the horizon, both in my own life, but in the life of our church, in the life of people that I care about, people like you. Now, today in the message, we're going to watch as Jesus went to the top of a mountain. He went to the top of the mountain before he walked into the dark valley that would be his death on a cross. And perhaps you've heard of faith that can move mountains, but today we're going to see a mountain scene that I'm convinced can move our faith. Today we're going to watch as one person's mountaintop experience can actually lead us through our valley. So welcome back to part 5 of a series all about the life of Peter. And we're studying the life of Peter because his story really is good news. It's good news for our story. See, Peter was a very normal person, but today in the Bible, we're going to see he experienced something that was far from normal. And I'm very excited to talk about this passage. In fact, I've never given a message on this, so I'm so excited to dive in. Now, before we get to the passage, just a little bit of review. In this series, we're studying the Gospel of Mark. Mark was a scribe, and Mark collected the stories of Peter, and he packaged these stories together about the life of Jesus in a very specific way. He designed his gospel in a very specific way. In Mark 1:1, chapter 1, verse 1, Mark gives us an intro to who Jesus is, and then he breaks his document, his book, his gospel down into 3 main chunks. And we are in the part of the Gospel of Mark where Jesus has turned his attention and his direction to what would happen to him in Jerusalem. He has turned towards the cross. And so the Gospel of Mark is getting darker as we read on. But first, today in the Gospel of Mark, something very bright is about to happen. So we're picking up our study of the Gospel of Mark in Mark chapter 9, verse 2. Let me set this scene for you, the mountaintop moment. After 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John. So these are the 3 who were closest to Jesus. Peter, James, and John. Peter, the Peter we've been talking about, the Peter we've been studying, with him, and he led them up a high mountain. Takes them up a high mountain where they were all alone. And there he was transfigured before them. This is often called the Mount of Transfiguration. His clothes became dazzling white, whiter than anyone in the world could bleach them. And there appeared before them Elijah and Moses, who were talking with Jesus. We'll pause there for a moment. So Peter, James, and John, they weren't seeking a mountaintop experience. In fact, I think many Jesus followers today are living for the experience. They are seeking the mountaintop experience. Peter, James, and John were not seeking that. But Jesus, he led them to that. Now this moment, this transfiguration, it's recorded in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Those are often called the synoptic gospels because they give a very similar synopsis of the life of Jesus. But Matthew and Mark, they use a very specific word here in the passage, a very specific verb. It is the Greek word metamorpho. Metamorpho. It means to be transfigured or transformed or changed. It's where we get our word metamorphosis. And so here in the moment in Mark 9, the gospel writers are telling us what happened to Jesus. He is in fact changed. He goes through this metamorphosis, and there before the eyes of Peter, James, and John, they see something very special of who Jesus is. They are seeing with clarity a very specific part of his identity. Now, a few years back for Christmas, my friend John, he gave me this very unique gift. John goes to our Lehigh campus, and John said, "Hey, I want to stop by. I got something for you for Christmas." So John knocks on the door. I love gifts. And so he comes in and he gives me a very unique translation of the Bible. It's called the St. John's Bible. It was commissioned by St. John's University. Now, this is an interesting book. This is a copy of the first handwritten Bible ever produced since the printing press. And it's handwritten in calligraphy by a man named Donald Jackson. And Donald Jackson is the personal calligrapher to the Queen of England. I mean, what a unique translation of the Bible. And so it's incredible. It's handwritten calligraphy. But in this, there's some incredible artwork. And there's this really fascinating rendition of the Transfiguration. And I wanted to show this piece of art to you for just a moment. It looks like this in Mark 9 as we read along. Take a look at this right here. It's this picture of the Transfiguration. Now obviously this is an artistic sketch, okay? This is not necessarily what it looked like, but I just want to draw your attention to one thing in this piece of art. And that is the metamorphosis, this transfiguration. The text says he was whiter than anyone could bleach any amount of clothing. And what I want you to see here is this is a picture of white hot glory on display. White hot glory on display. And this is what Peter and James and John were seeing. This is just giving us a little glimpse of what this moment looked like. Now, if you are a skeptic at heart like me, if you're a skeptic at heart like me, you hear about a story like this and you think, really? I mean, what type of magic trick is this? Why did Jesus have to put on some show? Why did this transfiguration have to happen? I mean, really, did this actually happen? Well, I think it's very reasonable and rational to believe that this has happened. I mean, if Jesus can calm the storm, and we see that in the Gospels, if he can heal the sick, if he can cleanse the lepers, if he can cast out evil spirits in the lives of people, if he can feed thousands, if he is fully God, then he can demonstrate his glory in this way. And this is exactly what's happening. This is what Jesus is doing. He's giving his disciples a glimpse of who he really is. He is fully God. And of course, if you are fully God, you are fully divine, you are full of glory, then you can give people a picture of that glory. And that's exactly what Jesus is doing. See, the disciples had seen Jesus' humanity. They'd been with him for quite some time by now. They'd seen his humanity on display. They've seen glimpses of his divinity on display. And now they are seeing clearly that Jesus is fully God. They are seeing his divinity just as they have seen his humanity. And we must understand both if we're to understand who Jesus actually is. Fully God, fully man. And this, on the Mount of Transfiguration, is a physical picture of the glory that Jesus is. Now, the story goes on. There's a few more fascinating elements inside of this transfiguration moment. Elijah and Moses are there on the mountaintop as well. And we read this, thousands of years later, and we think, why are these additional characters showing up? I mean, why did they have to get involved? Why Elijah? Why Moses? This seems a bit strange. But what Jesus is doing here is very, very specific. For these men who lived in the first century, and for the first century audience, for a Jewish audience, this was an incredibly important part of understanding who Jesus is. When Elijah and Moses show up, Jesus is taking Peter and James and John back to something that happened, back to a group of people that existed a few thousand years before this, thousands of years before. And it's really important that we understand what this was like. So Jesus on this mountaintop is taking Peter, James, and John back to a previous mountain, sort of the original mountain in the Old Testament, if you will. He's moving them back to the Mount of Sinai. He's moving them back to Mount Sinai. Moses was on the top of the mountain at Sinai, and when Moses shows up here in this moment, it's a hyperlink back to that moment for Peter, James, and John, and for us. See, when God led his people out of Egypt, he led them during the day with a cloud and at night with a pillar of fire, and he brought them to Mount Sinai. And Mount Sinai for these people, it was a very terrifying experience. I mean, smoke and clouds and thunder. It was a very scary experience. In fact, let me take you back to Sinai and read a little bit for you out of the book of Exodus about what this mountain was like, because it will explain a whole bunch about what's going on this mountain with Jesus in the first century. In Exodus, we see this. On the morning of the third day, there was thunder and lightning with a thick cloud over the mountain and a very loud trumpet blast. Everyone in the camp trembled. So out of Egypt, in the camp, they're trembling. Then Moses led the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. Mount Sinai was covered with smoke because the Lord descended on it in fire. The smoke billowed up from it like smoke from a furnace, and the whole mountain trembled violently. As the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and the voice of God answered him. The Lord descended to the top of Mount Sinai and called Moses to the top of the mountain. So Moses went up. And the Lord said to him, "Go down and warn the people so they do not force their way through to see the Lord, and many of them perish. Even the priests who approach the Lord must consecrate themselves, or the Lord will break out against them." Moses said to the Lord, "The people cannot come up Mount Sinai, because you yourself warned us. Put limits around the mountain and set it apart as holy." The Lord replied, "But go down and bring Aaron up with you. But the priests and the people must not force their way through to come up to the Lord, or he will break out against them." So Moses went down to the people and told them. Can you picture this? I mean, this is like a scene out of Lord of the Rings. I mean, there's a thick cloud, it's a dark mountain, there's a voice, there's smoke, there's fire. It was a terrifying scene of God's power and might. Only Moses and Aaron were allowed to approach. I mean, normal people could not approach. Normal people like Peter, James, and John, they were not permitted. They were not allowed to take their next step up the mountain. It was absolutely terrifying. Now, back to the Mount of Transfiguration. Let's go from Sinai back to the Mount in Mark 9. If you are Peter and James and John, and you know something about how terrifying Sinai was, and now you are on a mount where God's glory is on display, and Moses shows up, you are reliving Sinai, and you're thinking to yourself, there's no way I'm making it out of here alive. I mean, this is absolutely terrifying for them, which explains what happens next in Mark 9. So let's read on. Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it's good for us to be here." I imagine he's nervous. He's wondering what is about to happen. "Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He did not know what to say. They were so frightened. Then a cloud appeared and covered them. And a voice came from the cloud. "This is my son, whom I love. Listen to him." So of course, Peter and the boys, they're frightened. I mean, no one went up to Sinai and made it down alive unless you were permitted like Moses or Aaron. No one could be covered in the cloud of Sinai and make it out alive. And I just don't think we can fathom what this moment must have been like, how powerful this moment was. I mean, God's glory is like a jet engine overpowering everything in its wake. I don't think we can quite grasp the weight of this moment on top of this mountain. One author, N.T. Wright, talks about what this experience could have been like. In fact, talks about what it's like to be in the presence of the glory of God. Look at what N.T. Wright says. He says, "How can you put an earthquake into a test tube or the sea into a bottle? How can you live with the terrifying thought that the hurricane has become human, that fire has become flesh, that life itself came to life and walked in our midst?" He's talking about Jesus. Christianity either means that or it means nothing. It's either the more devastating disclosure of the deepest reality in the world, or it's a sham. It's nonsense, a bit of deceitful play acting. Most of us, unable to cope with saying either of these things, condemn ourselves to live in the shallow world in between. N.T. Wright is trying to get at the power of the gospel. He's trying to get at the power that Peter and James and John saw in that moment up on the mountain. They were frightened, and we would be frightened too. But it's the type of fear that draws us in, not the type of fear that pushes us out. And so Peter thinks that he should build a shelter. Now this is a little bit interesting too. I mean, it's a little bit confusing until we break this down a little bit. The word for shelter is the word tabernacle. And so Peter is doing what he saw people do back in the Old Testament. A tabernacle or a tent, it was this place where God's presence would dwell. It's where his presence would dwell, and it was a shelter Really, God would live inside of this tabernacle, but it would shelter people from the crushing weight of his glory and his presence. And so God would go with them, but he would remain inside of this tabernacle, and it would serve as a barrier, a protection from people and the incredible power that is the glory of God. And so Peter thinks, well, I'll build a shelter, because just like in the Old Testament, this incredible glory that I'm seeing in the life of Jesus now, well, it will inhabit this shelter. It'll also honor him as well. And so Peter thinks, well, I should just build a shelter. But before that can happen, there's a voice from heaven. It says something very similar to the voice from heaven in the Jordan when Jesus was baptized. And this voice gives us a massive clue to what this passage is all about. It's an interpretive clue to what's going on here in Mark 9. It's reaffirming. This voice is reaffirming and recommunicating the identity of Jesus. And so essentially there doesn't need to be a shelter, because God's glory is in Jesus. Jesus is the representation of who God is. In Jesus, we see the full glory of God. So there will be no shelter. There will be no tabernacle. There's no need for a temple. There's no need for a veil. God's glory is now in the person of Jesus. Now, inside of this message from heaven, inside of this voice, there's a bit of a next step. It's the next step of this: listen to him. That's what it said. This is my son, listen to him. And the word listen here really carries with it the idea of obedience. It's obey him. The Greek word for listen is very similar to our word acoustics. It's this idea of listening. But the word here, listen, is the word hyperakuo. Hyperakuo. It's listen so carefully, listen so closely that you do what is said, that you actually obey. Pay such careful attention that you obey him, you obey Jesus. And so this is what's happening up on the mountain. And if you had a moment like this in your life, wouldn't it be a mountaintop experience for you? It certainly would for me. And the mountaintop experience, it's about to come to an end. Let's read on in Mark 9. Suddenly, when they looked around, they no longer saw anyone with them except Jesus. So this moment begins to come to an end, because mountaintop experiences, they usually do. And as they were coming down the mountain, Jesus gave them orders not to tell anyone what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. So here we see this continued theme throughout the book of Mark, which is wait to reveal what has happened. They kept the matter to themselves, discussing what rising from the dead meant. And they asked him, why do the teachers of the law say that Elijah must come first? So they go back to Elijah, like, okay, Jesus, can you help us understand why Elijah just was in that moment? And Jesus replied, well, to be sure, Elijah does come first and restores all things. Why then is it written that the Son of Man must suffer much and be rejected? But I tell you, Elijah has come, and they have done to him everything they wished, just as it is written about him. Matthew gives us a few more insights into who this Elijah figure was. Jesus is referring back to John the Baptist, the front runner, the forerunner, the one who would prepare the way for Jesus. And John the Baptist has already arrived on the scene. Mark has communicated that to us already. And then it all disappears. This moment ends, and they are safe. They are safe with Jesus. And Jesus announces to them what's about to happen next. So they have this incredible mountaintop experience. And then Jesus talks about this. Soon he will be dead. It's a mountaintop experience. But what's happening next is Jesus will head into his valley. It was bright on the mountain, but now things are about to get even darker as Jesus makes his way to Jerusalem, the darkness of the cross. But I want you to see this powerful connection, this powerful truth for us today. It's our gospel truth. And it's this: the glory of God, it won't crush us, because Jesus was crushed for us. See, the glory of God, the weight of who God is, the power and might that he has, the power that was seen in Sinai, it would crush people. But it will not crush you and I now, because Jesus was crushed for us. The glory of God won't crush us in Jesus. In Jesus, it welcomes us. Now, the glory of God doesn't have to be something that frightens us. In Jesus, it's something that comforts us. The glory of God was in a cloud at Sinai, but now God's full glory is in Jesus, our our Savior. So here in this moment in Mark 9, we see the mountain in the valley, the mountain of glory, the mountain of transfiguration, but the valley that will be the cross. Here we see both. And throughout our lives, we swing from one to the other. We have valley moments and we have mountain moments throughout our lives. Sometimes within the very same day, in fact, we go from both. We go to both. And I was thinking about this recently. Before I moved to Utah, I was a youth pastor, and for years I would take large groups of students to Mexico to build houses. It was, in fact, for them a mountaintop experience. I mean, it was a whole week of being away from the distractions of home, connected in community, focused on mission, and immersed in the gospel, immersed in the message of Jesus. It was a mountaintop experience for them. And one year on the way home, there was a kid on the trip named Sheldon, and something really interesting happened to him. He quickly went from a mountaintop experience to a valley. Let me tell you what happened to Sheldon. We stopped at the market to do some shopping in Mexico before we crossed back over the border into the States. And Sheldon purchased something at the market that didn't let him get back over the border. We went through the border in the car I was driving, the van load of students I was driving, we made it through. And as we made it across the border, which is, a few hours in time, it takes a while, all the cars collected. And one driver of one of the vehicles said, "Hey, Eric, we have a problem." They won't let Sheldon back. Sheldon was caught smuggling something across the border. I'm thinking to myself, you have got to be kidding me. Sheldon, he bought something at the market. He's smuggling it across the border. I mean, talk about a mountaintop experience, building homes, bringing help and hope to people in Mexico. And now all of a sudden, Sheldon's smuggling something across the border. I'm like, what happened? And so I turned back to go find Sheldon, and the dogs are out, and the officers, the border patrol, they've got Sheldon. Sheldon to this day is still in Mexico. No, I'm kidding. He made it back. But what happened is Sheldon was smuggling cigars across the border. Who was his youth pastor? Anyways, I had to spend a lot of time with Sheldon, helping him understand what he had just done, helping him out of the valley. I mean, a week building homes in Mexico, mountaintop experience. And now things changed quickly for Sheldon. And things changed quickly for Matthew, Mark, for Peter and James and John. And so in this moment, we see the mountaintop experience. We see the valley experience. And so when it comes to people like Sheldon getting through the valley in that scenario, and when it comes to you and I mean, how do we move forward? How do we move forward out of the valley? Well, there's a few ways, but before we get to those, I do want you to know this. The way that we move through the valley is the way that we move through the mountain. The next step is the same. It's to trust, it's to worship, and it's to do what the voice said in Mark 9 on the Mount. It's to listen to him, to listen so carefully that we obey. Peter would later write about this experience. Years later, in his second letter to a group of Jesus followers who were certainly in a valley season, Peter would describe and sort of talk about this moment. Look at this in 2 Peter. It says, he, that's Jesus, received honor and glory from God the Father when the voice came to him from the majestic glory saying, "This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased." So Peter is much later reflecting back on what happened on the mountaintop. He says, "We ourselves heard this voice that came from heaven when we were with him on the sacred mountain." What a moment for Peter. I mean, this would be a moment that he would remember for the rest of his life. To which you might say, that's great for Peter. Peter had an incredible experience, an incredible moment with God. I want a moment like that. I mean, where's my experience with God? I want a mountaintop experience. I want to go through something like that. If I went through something like that, my faith would take off. I need a moment. Where's mine? Well, can I read to you something that explains all of this, that really can help you, even if you don't have a moment like that? Look at what Hebrews says about who Jesus is. Hebrews says this: "In the past, God spoke to our ancestors through the prophets at many times and in various ways." And in some of those ways were rare and remarkable experiences with God. Verse 2, "But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son." Jesus has spoken to us, whom he appointed heir of all things, and through whom also he made the universe. And look at this. The Son is the radiance. This is Jesus. Jesus is the radiance of God's glory. Peter, James, and John, they saw it on the mountain. He is the exact representation of his being, sustaining all things by his powerful word. After he had provided purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the majesty in heaven. What the book of Hebrews is saying is fantastic. Jesus has spoken to us. Jesus has communicated to us. Jesus has acted on our behalf. We can see his glory as we look at him throughout the Bible, and we can worship him. We can have an experience with him through the words of the Bible. We can see who he is, the fullness of God's glory radiating in the life of Jesus, and we can take our next step. See, when we're in the valley, the way we get through it is not focusing on what we must do to get through it. It's by focusing on what Jesus has already done for us in his valley. And when we take a close look at what Jesus has done on our behalf, it has the power, that alone has the power to lead us out of the valley. When we look at what Jesus has done in the valley of the cross on our behalf, it can move us out of a valley, and that alone can give us the joy we need to continue to take our next step. So an experience with God, if it happens in your life, that's fantastic. Those moments do still happen, and if God permits that and allows that in your life, that's great. We just shouldn't expect it as a guarantee from him. Those moments, those experiences are not the foundation of our faith. If they happen, great. We should not base our faith on those moments happening or give up our faith if those moments have not happened. Peter, James, and John experienced something rare and remarkable. It was an incredible experience for them. And maybe in our lives we will have a few incredible moments as well, but they are not the foundation of our faith. What Jesus has done, what Jesus has said, that alone is the foundation of our faith. So, by glimpsing the glory of Jesus in the Bible, by glimpsing and beholding the glory of Jesus in the Bible, we can give glory to Jesus in the valley. So years later, Peter would encourage people in the valley in his first letter to people suffering. And he would say this, "Dear friends, don't be surprised at the fiery ordeal that has come on you to test you as though something strange were happening to you. You're in a valley, but don't be surprised by it." And then he says this, "But rejoice. Rejoice inasmuch as you participate in the sufferings of Christ, so that you may be overjoyed. Rejoice and be overjoyed when his glory is revealed." The glory that Peter saw on the mountain is glory that you and I will see someday. And because that glory is in our future, we can worship Jesus now. He is with us now. And because of that, it can place us on higher ground. So worshiping in the valley sets us on higher ground. Obeying in the valley sets us on higher ground. Trusting in the valley, it sets us on higher ground. Religion puts us at the base of a mountain and says, you better start climbing, but the gospel places us on the top of the mountain and says, behold, look at what Jesus has done. So if you're in the valley, my encouragement to you is to continue to behold Jesus. Look at what he has done for you in his valley, and that alone can set you on higher ground. When you continue to worship, obey, and trust him, that can set you on higher ground. One of my favorite songs right now is a song called Highs and Lows, and it talks about what we're talking about today. I want to read to you a few of the lyrics from this song. It says, highs and lows, Lord, you're with me either way it goes. Should I rise or should I fall? Even so, Lord, your mercy is an even flow. You're too good to let me go. Should I dance on the heights, mountaintop experience, or make my bed among the depths? It's as if I'm resting in the valley. Your mercy waits at every end, like you planned it from the start, highs and lows. You surround me either way it goes. Should I rise or should I fall? Lord, you're with me through it all. So whatever season you're in, a mountaintop season, a valley season, a high season, or a low season, my invitation to you is to behold Jesus, the one who went through his own valley on your behalf, went through a valley for you and for me. And the glory that Peter saw on the mountain, it is the glory we will all see someday in the future. But until then, we can be reminded that Jesus, full of glory, is with us now. Jesus is with you on the mountain, and he's with you in the valley. Let me pray for us. God, we thank you for this moment in Mark chapter 9. What an incredible moment that Peter, James, and John got to be a part of. They got to behold. They got to see your glory in the second person of the Trinity, in Jesus. And we might not have a moment like that. We probably won't. But we thank you for the promise of the Bible that tells us someday that glory is something we will experience. But until then, we can worship, obey, and we can trust Jesus. We can get a glimpse of his glory and the greatness that he is as we read the Bible. We can see what he's done for us. And as we behold what he's done for us, it can lead us to worship, obey, and trust in our valley, and that alone can set us on higher ground. So Jesus, to everybody who feels like they're in a valley right now, I pray you would give them a glimpse of who you are through the Bible. You give them a glimpse of your love for them as seen in your life, death, and resurrection. You give them a glimpse of your power in your life, death, and resurrection. And because of that, they can worship you, and that would set them on higher ground. And although life might feel like a valley circumstantially, they would be able to experience what Peter talked about. They would be able to be overjoyed and rejoice because you are with us in the valley. We thank you for that. In your name, Jesus, we pray. Amen.
I've carried a burden for too
Well, what an incredible truth that we got to learn today from Pastor Eric as we're continuing in this series. Just the incredible truth that in the mountain high and the valley low, Jesus is with us. You know, sometimes our feelings can be deceptive. In fact, oftentimes our feelings can be deceptive. And we can be in times where we feel like, obviously, Jesus doesn't care about me, or Jesus doesn't love me, or whatever it might be. But it's good for us to remember this truth that Jesus is with us in the mountain highs and the valley lows in our lives. Now, I want to remind you guys of something. If you're watching right now and you're wondering what is your next step, if you're saying maybe even, this message really meant a lot to me, I want to talk to a pastor about it more, any of those types of things, you can go ahead, open up a new tab on your browser right now and visit smccutah.org/next steps. And there's a connect form that is basically right at the top of that page, and you can fill that out and a staff member will reach out to you soon. And also, if you're watching and saying, hey, man, I just want more people to know about Jesus. I want to reach more people and help them become fully devoted and fully delighted followers of Jesus Christ. If you want to partner with us financially, you can do that right now by going to smccutah.org/give. Well, guys, thank you for being here again today, and I hope to see you again next week.